Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like The Ultimates, You Are Deadpool, and Immortal Hulk. It's Al Ewing. Thanks for coming on, Al.
Hello. Pleasure to be here.
So while we're going to mostly talk about Immortal Hulk, I want to start by talking about some of your own background as a comic reader, because one of the things that stuns me so much about your work is how brilliantly it connects with elements from the deep history of comics. And so I just want to go start at the beginning briefly with like talking about what you grew up reading. Like, what were you digging into, when you first got into comics?
I mean, the very first comics I ever read. You start off with stuff that's like lying around the house, which would have been like Tintin, Asterix, I think that would have probably been the stuff that was sort of around the house, the medium. That would have been my first glimpse of the medium.
Mm-hmm.
And around the time I was very small and learning to read, there were the British humour comics, which were anthologies of page-long stories that were kind of like sitcom-esque. It was usually a kid with a gimmick. There was Jack, the name would be like Jackpot, the gambling kid, or Ivolot and Tony Broke. And Ivolot was very rich, and Tony Broke was very poor. There was a lot of like class struggle in the comics of my youth.
Were they kind of like strips?
Yeah. Little like, I guess the closest equivalent would be the old American Sunday strips. These sort of page long kind of Sunday strips in the Sunday newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
So things like, I'm trying to think of examples now. I mean, Steve Canyon was one of those, wasn't he? So that was more adventure. But something like I'm trying to remember the names of it, like What's the Matter Pop, or Happy Hooligan.
Sure.
So you get these things that are like a page long, and they're once a week, and you get like about 30 pages of newsprint with, these things. And these are these are basic, like 12-panel grids. There was very little formalist experimentation going on. The strip I liked most was a thing called Cliffhanger, which was the big kind of formalist experimenting thing. Which was like, and what that was you get like a page of strip, and then at the end you'd be offered and it was a page about a kid with a gimmick, and the gimmick in this case was that he was on the run from some evil spies. And every issue he'd be in some situation that the reader would have to get him out of, and the reader was offered a kind of multiple choice. And if you've read You Are Deadpool recently, you can sort of start seeing the joint, and you'd sort of pick one of three possible options. Then you'd go to the letters page, and you'd have like 3 extra panels detailing, and it was very simple stuff. It was like usually the obvious solution wasn't the correct solution, and there was a solution that was just stupid, and then there was like a third solution that was like, and this is it for reasons you might not have, imagined, or for some lateral thinking reason. And it was very, it was very silly. There were a lot of like jokes. There were a lot of Mad Magazine style jokes in the background and in the margins. Every week there was a little sign somewhere saying "Abolish Tuesdays." There was a little box with a handle in it, which meant nothing and was just a detail for you to spot. And it's. I mean, describing all this stuff, it's sort of like. You don't realize at the time how much this stuff is kind of programming you to sort of. I'm pretty sure a lot of my thinking when it comes to like jokes and joking around and comedy in comics comes from these kind of. There's probably a lot that's osmosed from out of those old humor comics.
Yeah, it actually kind of sounds. It's interesting that it's like this book full of primarily like kind of straightforward narratives or straightforward stories in comic strip form, and then there's this one about like just kind of going bonkers with like, as you're saying, like formalistic
Yeah,
expression and
yeah.
everything. So it's kind of like it kind of sounds like in a weird way like a distillation of like how you approach comics, and it's just like I don't know. I mean, it sounds like quite the breeding ground and something that you wouldn't even necessarily naturally think about as you're like talking about influences or something like that.
Yeah, well, it's only kind of mentioning it because like you asked what the first ever comic I read was, and for some reason I didn't start with 2000 AD,
Mm,
or which was what I moved on to from the kids comics, and
right.
then the first Marvel comic I ever read was like Secret Wars, which was this big. It was like reprinted in the UK, and it was just this thing of like, oh, the Americans have made this comic with all the heroes in. Let's reprint it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a no-brainer. Um, and yeah, that was my kind of introduction to all of the Marvel superheroes. But yeah, no, looking back, it's like things you just don't, because the humor comics, literally every kid, every child in Britain. I mean, this is like the early 80s. I was born in 77. This would be the early 80s. I'd have been, I mean, I say learning to read. I've learned to read on like the Tintin and the Asterisk, but this would be, I could read. It would be like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's a long time ago. But certainly, between there was definite. I know I started reading 2000 AD around the age of 9.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say from about 6, 7ish to about 9, that would have been my period on the human comics. But like every child in Britain, everybody, they were reading the Beano. There was a real difference between whether you were like reading. It was like Marvel vs. DC. You were either like reading like the Beano and the Dandy, which were these very kind of straight laced like. I mean, you had Dennis the Menace and the Bash Street Kids who were like sort of anarchic, but in kind of quite a controlled way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had like the IPC comics, which were things like Buster, which is the one I read, the one with Cliffhanger in it. There was Whizzer and Chips, which was like the gimmick was it was 2 comics in one, and you were either a whiz kid or a chipite. You kind of made your choice, and like you had your favorite comic, but
Right.
they were both the same comic. And the thing there was that the protagonists of the strip weren't so anarchic. They weren't so like it was, but the worlds they inhabited were.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the Beano had like Dennis the Menace, Minnie the Minx. You might be noticing a trend. Beryl the Peril. The basically kids who did terrible things, and the end of the strip was them either getting a well-deserved slippering, which was corporal punishment with a slipper
Mm-hmm.
on the bum. Which again at the time that was parenting. But if they were doing it in school, then they would get the cane, but or they get away with it.
Yeah.
Roger the Dodger, he was another one. He was like a con man, a child con man. So you had all these like characters in a kind of these kind of evil characters in an ordinary world, whereas the comics I read were kind of more less anti. The characters weren't kind of the anti-authority
Mm-hmm.
things. It was the entire world was just this chaotic anarchic place.
Yeah.
That's how it felt to me, anyway.
Yeah.
Pretty get people writing and saying, nice theory, but it's complete rubbish, and this is why. Which fair enough.
I am kind of curious, like with it sounds like you from what I was saying, you grew up reading, you read Secret Wars, and you didn't, from what I read in interviews, you didn't read a lot of Marvel growing up. Like that's one of the interesting things about your work, and when it comes to Marvel, is it's like you read the Ultimates, for example, and the Ultimates has like I don't know if it's fair to say that Lord Chaos and Master Order are deep cuts, but I feel like they're not characters that are referenced a whole lot. And like, I mean, where does that come from though? Like, do you have a deep background, or is that something you get into when you're researching your Marvel work?
I mean, I think there's a thing that all comic writers have, which is their kind of secret weakness, is that deep inside there's that little voice going, comics haven't really been as good as they were when you were 12.
Right.
And I mean, there's a slight element of that in that, I'm kind of, at the back of my mind, there's always this sort of Captain America is always drawn by Mike Zeck.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I mean, rereading Secret Wars, my God, the writing is Jim Shooter's writing is interesting in many ways. The number of times you have, I mean, A, they're all having sex with each other. B, the number of times they come across a location, it's like, oh, it's as big as 15 Delawares. And it's like, what? This room alone is the size of 200 Madison Square Gardens. It's like, you're giving me these words. And it's like, as a kid, you're just like, oh, yeah, it's really big. And like, as an adult, you're like, reading that makes no sense. How do they even find each other? Oh, we'll meet in the room. We'll meet in the room on like the 2 billionth floor. That's like the size of 100 Manhattans. And it's like, oh yeah, where will you meet in this room? It's like Ringworld. It's like Larry Niven. But like, so there's that. But there was a period where I kind of moved on for the reprinted Secret Wars to discovering that newsagents many newsagents did sell American comics at like 40p a time, not like particularly regularly or reliably, but they would have some and they'd put them on the shelves and they'd be like 40p a go. And like every time I went to get a haircut, like, because I hated having my haircut, so as a treat, I'd get to go to the newsagents next door and like get like 5 or 6 comics. And those would be like American comics and they'd be Marvel comics. And it'd be, I think Avengers was one I was getting as regular as I could. So I'd miss like every 3rd issue or so. And then Thor, this would have been around like the Walt Simonson era.
Oh, yeah.
And, it might have just been those two. I'm pretty sure... No, because John Byrne Fantastic Four, that was reprints. That was reprinted in Secret Wars. Because Secret Wars did like the main Secret Wars mini itself. And then when they ran out of that, and the backup strips were like Alpha Flight. And I was talking to another podcast about this. Backup strips were like Alpha Flight and like J.M. DeMatteis's Iceman miniseries and like ridiculous stuff like that.
That's super random. Stuff
that like, it was literally like, what can we get that we don't want to put in other comics? What do we get that we don't want to put in the back of Transformers? And it's so, yeah. And then after the original Secret Wars ended, they were just like, okay, let's do Secret Wars 2 and like every tie-in. So it ended up, and they dropped all the backup strips because, they didn't need them anymore. They had, they could just do, every issue was like a whole American comic. Except like occasionally it'd been an issue of the actual Secret Wars 2 miniseries, which again, some very interesting writing there.
Yes.
The obsession with blenders is fascinating. The obsession with consumer goods. It's this very 80s thing. It's this weird... And, reading more Jim Shooter, like before that and after that, you can really see... You can see it as part of a continuum of his work. But yeah, that was my intro to Marvel Comics was Secret Wars and Secret Wars 2. So I don't know, I don't know what I don't know how you could form a theory of my book based on that.
Do you know the origin story of Secret Wars?
It was toys.
Yeah, it was toys. Yeah, it was basically. I think basically Jim Shooter was trying to sell toys, and so he was like, "I'm gonna make this happen," which is kind of funny in contrast with that theme of consumerism.
I had the toys.
Oh, you had the toys.
I cannot remember if I got the toys before I got the comic. I also had a sticker album, which was when you'd collect stickers. It could be football stickers, but in my case, it was like superhero stickers, and you collect them and you paste them into an album. And the idea was to get all the stickers, and you trade them in the playground. Except nobody else was getting Secret Wars stickers, so it was just this random, But anyway, yeah, toys. The toys, they were great.
Yeah,
they had the little shields.
At what point did you start getting in? I mean, because like in the back of the first issue of the Immortal Hulk, you have a write-up where you talk about your personal connection with the character and how those first 6 issues really got you. But at what point was Was the Hulk a childhood thing, or was that something that came
Yes,
later? Okay.
yeah. Now slotting this into what I've already told you about like Buster Comic and 2008 Comic and Secret Wars, I was definitely into the Hulk when I started reading Secret Wars.
Mm-hmm.
So I say this is my introduction to the Marvel heroes. It's like there are heroes you find out about from reading comics, like Colossus. I thought for the longest time, I thought for about a week that so not longest time, but I thought for about a week that Colossus had like psychic powers of some kind, because like the only thing I'd ever read him in for like about a week or 2 weeks was this thing where he was clutching his head because Spider-Man had just like webbed it,
Mm-hmm.
and I assumed that was him trying to use his psychic powers.
Mm-hmm.
So so there are heroes you kind of learn about through them all standing in a line in the first issue sequels, and there are heroes who you learn about because you just know. It's
Right.
like they're on telly, they're on, they're in coloring books. They're sort of, you run into them. You learn about them through osmosis, and it's like Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, and the Hulk. And those if you want to talk about like a big five of the first five superheroes you come across, probably them. If certainly if you're a certain age. And the Hulk. I was very into the Hulk. I think he had a TV cartoon, where Rick Jones was a cowboy,
Mm-hmm.
which was again fascinating. You look back on this stuff and it all seems so normal. But yeah, there was I had a kind of cardboard decal thing that like went on my wall where you could sort of pose it, and like the cardboard limbs were kind of on the cardboard torso with little screws, so you could bend it about and make it. Yeah, and I had one for the Hulk and I had one for Spider-Man, but I like the one for the Hulk better. I mean, this is like delving into the deep reaches of my memory. So the Hulk was definitely my favourite, and around about this time, and again, I cannot remember if this is before or after Secret Wars. I would have to look it up. I think Secret Wars was like 86,
Yeah, I think it was.
or the UK reprint was 86.
Yeah, I maybe the American one was 85, but then that was 86. Yeah.
Again, I would have been about 9, but again, I would have been about 9, and yeah. No, this would have been before then. I found a kind of pocketbook thing, and I've only seen, I don't remember the cover, but I've seen like people have kind of messaged me with like, do you mean this?
Mm-hmm.
With like this one pocketbook that had like all of the first 6 issues in color, and it probably was that. But that was in like the school library,
Mm-hmm.
which was just like a bookshelf in a corridor somewhere. It wasn't like an actual library room, but it was like, if you kind of, if they gave you like a free period for any reason, and it was like, look, yeah, for some reason we're just not going to do a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired. I've been drinking. So like, go and get a book, and if you don't have a book with you, get one off the shelf. And on the shelf there was this pocketbook with the first 6 issues of the Hulk in. And like reading that as like having seen the cartoon and like having got a rough idea from the cartoon that like, you had Dr. Banner and he turned into the Hulk and he wanted to be cured, and on TV it was Lou Ferrigno, and it's this sort of very rough idea of what it was all about. I might have read like one American issue, but I cannot remember what was in it.
Mm.
But yeah, reading those first 6 issues. Oh God! See, we're going deep. We're going deep into the excavation of how I learned about the Hulk, because before that even, there was like a Marvel reprint annual I got from a jumble sale.
A jumble, like a garage sale type thing?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I am seriously trying to work out the order of events here because, jumble sales are like, they're like garage sales, they're like yard sales, but they kind of happen in a kind of communal hall.
Oh, okay.
and the whole community comes out with their tat, and so it's like I don't know, 10 or 15 yard sales happening at once, like a car boot sale but without the cars.
Oh, I gotcha. One of the things that what you're talking about right now is one of the fascinating things about comics to me is like it's so hard. I mean, for me, I regularly try to piece together exactly how I got into comics, and I know it was some combination of the Transformers comic from Marvel in the '80s, the early '90s X-Men comics, the Batman and X-Men animated series in the early '90s over
Yeah,
here, and then like they had like the Marvel Universe trading cards that Marvel was producing, and like those combination of things were like the impetus. But I don't remember like exactly the order of operations because they all kind of came out around the same time ish, and I was getting them as I could.
I mean you have the version of the story that makes a good story.
Right.
So like my first Marvel comic was Secret Wars, the UK reprint. They all stood in a line and said their names. Mike Zackart, Jim Shooter story. It was great. Blah blah blah. Here's a good story. Backup was Alpha Flight. But it's like no, because before that there was that Hulk, and before that there was that Marvel Annual, which had like old stories from the '60s reprinted, and like a Captain America story from the '50s.
Mm-hmm.
With this like dark, gloomy art, and he's like banging on about the commies and the Reds, and like there's heroin. It's like it's this insane thing, and then like the entirety of the Mongoose story, like the Hulk versus the fake space alien, who's also a commie,
Of course.
and then the very last section of Hulk 1. So basically, anything involving commies. Somebody in the UK was extremely against the communists,
And was putting it
and
together.
that dictated how they. And I think that was like the 1970 annual. So like, I don't know, and there's other things. There was in the 60s there was POW Comics and Odom's Comics basically, and like one of the things they did one called Fantastic, which had Thor in it. I don't think it had the Fantastic Four in. I think the Fantastic Four were in POW. So yeah. But that had like reprints of Spider-Man in it and Nick Fury. There is I am getting on such a tangent here. I'm so sorry, but that was another thing I found through the jumble sales was like an old POW annual, which I still have, which has like really weirdly recolored Spider-Man, a really recolored and relettered Nick Fury, whereas like any Americanism, like there's a bit where like the White House is mentioned, and like there's this thought balloon that's like made of Tipex and like lettered in a completely different hand, and it's like the president knows about this, and it's like to kind of so British audiences like understand what's going on. But yeah, there's this kind of so yeah, the tradition of kind of reprinting these old Marvel comics in like weird places and having them kind of appear to you. And with DC, that was never a thing. For whatever reason, the DC was never there in the same way. You had the Batman TV show. Everybody knew about Batman from the TV show.
Mm-hmm.
And like when I was 12, the Tim Burton film came out, and everybody was like, "Oh, it's the real Batman." It's like, no, that's just as camp in a different way. I mean, you've got to accept that sooner or later you've got to accept that the real Batman is the one who does the Batutsi. And carries a bomb around and has trouble getting rid of it. And like, that's the real Batman,
I feel like that gets back to what you were saying of like the everyone is chasing like the version of the characters that they saw them when they were 12, and it's like for a significant population that is it. But I do feel like back then there was a lot they didn't really figure out the trade paperback or collection market yet, and so there's all these like weird collections that people grew up on. Like I had this one that was the origins of the like The Origins of Marvel Comics by Stan Lee, and it was
Oh man.
horrifically does not even mention Jack Kirby in it, but it also actually, it's like the most random collection of comics. It's a lot of number ones. It's got like the Hulk, the first 2 issues of Hulk. It's got Fantastic Four 1, but also for some reason like 55. And it's got like an assortment of Doctor Strange comics. It's a very random collection, but it's like that's what I
That's
grew up
mad.
on. But I want to get into the Mortal Hulk, and I want to ask
Yeah, yeah,
about, this is clearly a character that's had a long history. He's existed for 50 plus years.
yeah.
He's existed long enough that he was even an enforcer in Vegas for a time called Joe Fixit, which I
Oh
love.
yes,
But
I did love those books. I remember I got into Hulk in terms of getting the American comics.
hmm
These might have been some from the newsagent next to the barber shop as well.
hmm
But the Peter David run and before that.
mm,
So yeah, right around the time, yeah, when John Byrne took over from Bill Mantlo, that's when I got on board.
mm. Yeah, Peter David was my
And
guy growing up.
yeah,
That whole run was
because he
amazing.
came right after that.
Well, it's interesting because like
There
one
was
of
a
the
little bit of Al Milgrom, and then it was Peter David.
Looking at Peter David stuff, it's kind of like a interesting inversion of what you do. Not it's not exact, but it's like his Hulk was like, so it was very functional and smart, but in a much less malevolent way. um, but
I mean, I do feel like he was kind of the first to kind of go back to the idea that the Hulk could be smart without Bruce Banner in the mix. Because I have this kind of ongoing. I have a Tumblr. That's probably the best way to find me. Bizarrely, is through that Hulk Tumblr. But I have a kind of Tumblr where at the moment I'm just like reprinting, just taking panels from old Hulk comics, just working through and taking any panel that sort of interests me. And it's just a hobby thing, and it's a way to kind of keep my head in that space. But one thing I've noticed is that again and again and again, the Hulk now has Bruce Banner's brain,
mhm,
but he's something's wrong. The body's affecting it, and it's like, but there's always that thing of like, oh, the Hulk is smart now, but also savage,
mhm.
and it's like he's got Bruce Banner's brain, but like the primal power of his body is like overriding it or something, and he's slowly getting dumb again, and it's like, I think Peter David was the first person to kind of. No, that's not quite right because he actually came back in, I think, the Al Milgrom issues. But it was Peter David who put some flesh on that. But
hmm
Al Milgrom kind of started it off. But it was like the Hulk is another personality
Right.
who was intelligent. So not. We had the Hulk as another personality, and it was like the Hulk speak. But I think that was when. I feel that was when people started really getting into that idea.
hmm Well, and especially like one of the things that was a huge comic for me when I was growing up was Future Imperfect, and like
Yeah,
the introduction of the Maestro, and about how like kind of like this dark side version of the Smart Hulk, and like what happens when
yeah,
somebody lives for
yeah.
far too long. It was just such a like it wasn't the Immortal Hulk in the same way, but it was like what happens in the Hulk. The end is very much the same thing, where it's like you're looking at this character who effectively cannot die, and what that does to both the person that he's trapped with and the character itself. It's really fascinating. But when you were developing your pitch for the book, were you deliberately trying, like, obviously you kind of have to do this, but were you deliberately trying to find an angle that hadn't been covered before, or are you just trying to find the best story you can tell?
I mean, there's always an element of that. I know. Before I got onto this, I mean, if like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when I was sort of working for Marvel, but on other books, the Hulk was one of those characters where I'd be like, I'd sort of, because you kind of think like, what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
Every, I think every writer does it. Like, what would you do with so and so? And
Right.
it's like it's not even a plan. It's just like an odd moment, like a thought exercise. while you're going for a walk, you just think, oh, what would I do with so and so? And like with the Hulk, I just didn't have an idea. I didn't have an answer. It was like, what can I do that hasn't been done? So, but luckily, I mean, I'll tell you when I started really wanting to write the Hulk. Because, I like the Hulk, but it's like, it was one of those characters where it was like, well, what would I even do with it? So it was like, I'm sort of happy not to write him. It's not like one of those where it's like, if I don't write,
Yeah.
if I don't write Hamster Man, I'll die. But it's like, because I was sort of in the writers' rooms for a little bit. I haven't really been in a writers' room since, barring, no, yeah, it would have been since about very early last year.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I was in the writers' room when they came up with Killing the Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great idea. It was like, hey, brilliant. Wow, that actually feels, like something happening. And then it was like he sort of came back sort of in Uncanny Avengers. And it was like, okay, so we've had and then he kind of comes back again sort of in Secret Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking, and, something in the back of my mind was sort of ticking over there, like going, yeah, he's coming back a lot. And then I was in another writer's room, and there was some talk about, like, okay, we're thinking it's time to actually bring it back.
Mm-hmm.
And then we ended up kind of claiming that beat for Avengers No Surrender, because we were planning that at the time. And this was like 9 months before anybody knew about that. This was way in advance, much further in advance than I usually work. Avengers No Surrender. And I remember having a thought in the writers' room, and I'm pretty sure I expressed it. But I remember having the thought that, like, what if it's just him? What if he just comes back? What if there's no? That probably wasn't the only time in that writers' room that I said something like, "Why don't we just have it happen for no reason?" And like, which isn't what you want to be saying in writers' rooms. Why doesn't it just happen for no reason? And it's like, which it makes sense in your head, but when you say it out loud, it's like, what is this person doing in the room? And I haven't been back, but like, it was like, why doesn't it happen for no reason? Why wasn't that just what he does?
Right.
And there was some sort of like, okay, and then it was like, well, whatever. The No Surrender team are doing that, and we'll sort of. So it was me and Jim and Mark's problem, and I was sort of pushing that quite a lot, and sort of saying to the other two, I'd really like to come out of this with a Hulk book, if because by then it was sort of lodged in there. I was like, oh man, we can make it a horror thing.
Mm-hmm.
We can make it really scary.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, and I think editorial was of the same mind. They were saying, oh yeah, we could make it really scary. And in fact, part of the when I got because I got the thing for like, do you want to pitch this? With a kind of caveat that we're asking a lot of people this. So like, if you've got a problem with going up against a bunch of people, this is like a spec pitch. We could turn around and say, no, we're not interested. But part of the brief when I got the word on that, on like, do you want to pitch, was like, we're interested in a horror tale.
Mm-hmm.
In a kind of, and it was, I sort of went through a couple of rounds of pitching, and like the first, it was Tom Brevoort, and he was very nice, because he was like, the first pitch, he was like, I like the tone, but it's too He said something that was very useful, which was like, you're playing very safe.
Mm.
Because the first pitch was like quite standard, like people are after the Hulk, you know, and it had like, I think it still had Jackie McGee in it, but it also had like, I think Doc Samson was in there, you know, and it was like, it had a bunch of, I think the leader was involved. It had a bunch of like Hulk stuff.
Yeah, classic Hulk stuff.
And Tom was like, I like the tone. I like, because I had the first issue all plotted out. That was as it is. That was as it came out. And I think I had like the second issue and the third issue pretty much as they are.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, it started getting into some quite samey territory.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom was like, okay, I like the tone of this so much. I like what you're advocating for with regards to the tone. So much that I'm going to like take another run at it. Be aware that, you know, right now you're playing it too safe.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of went back and I think 4 and 5 is where things diverge quite strongly from my original, the original idea, which was fairly safe. It was fairly staid. It was tonally different, tonally what it is now, but it was like plot-wise. And I think before when I sent the second pitch, and I think that was when the One Below Wall came into it. And we've sort of mentioned this in the solicits now. And I'm trying to be quite cagey and non-spoilery about it, but that was when things got a lot less me kind of thinking like, what do Hulk fans want out of a Hulk story?
Right.
And a lot more me saying, what do I want to tell right now in a story full stop? Take even like, not even a Hulk story, just a story full stop. What do I want to do stuff about? Because a lot of this stuff, because I've been making a big thing of like, oh, I've loved the Hulk since I was a kid. And part of that is like reassurance. It's like a reassurance game. It's like, you know, I'm a Hulk fan too, you guys.
Right. You're not going to lead us astray.
Don't worry when it gets weird. Don't worry when it gets, because I knew like number one, you know, he doesn't smash anything.
Right.
He doesn't even throw a punch.
At least not visibly.
I was so terrified that like this thing was going to come out and I was going to get like, and it's like, oh, you know, Hulk fans have been wonderful about it. They'd be like, yo, wow, yeah, I like this. And like, I was really worried they were going to be like, no, he's not. Oh, he's not exactly being the strongest one there is he? You know, he's just sort of scaring this dude. And it's like, but I'm really glad that people have kind of, I'm really happy that people have sort of are going with it, are kind of getting it. So that's good. That's great. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, one thing I really enjoy about the first issue, and you know, I haven't read past the first issue or anything like that, but I think that one element that often gets forgotten about this, like there's always the dichotomy of Banner and Hulk, and everyone handles it a little bit differently. But one of the things that's interesting about the first issue is like it ends with Banner and the mirror and everything like that, and it's like it's a horror book in a lot of ways, but it actually really underlines how much of this existence is a horror story for Banner himself.
Yeah. No, we get into that. It's I mean, issue 2, which I don't know when this podcast is coming out. I mean, like, how many?
It's coming out 2 Mondays from now.
Okay, so by the time somebody's listening to this, issue 2 might be out. I mean, yeah, that'll be very, very likely it will be out. I mean, I won't like drop any spoilers here, just in case. But I mean, people reading that issue, we see a lot more Banner. We see a lot more from Banner's point of view in that one.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, we're kind of. I was thinking a lot about like, because one thing I didn't want to do was like bring in even in that first draft that I talked about, that first pitch that I talked about with like, there's too much classic Hulk stuff in this. Even then, I was like, I wasn't bringing in. I think it was like Doc Samson and Betty, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't bringing in like any of the Hulk's rather large at this point supporting cast.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a big family. He's a family man, and he's got a big family. And it's like, so part of the thing is like, from a story point, you don't really want to bring all these guys in because every time, Korg pops up, you've got to explain who Korg is.
Right.
Scar, it's like, you've got to explain who Scar is. And it's, but that's like, okay. And Banner's back from the dead, and he's not talking to his wife. He's not talking to his son. He's not talking to any of his friends. He's wandering around like riding the rails. He's the only person he's talked to is the guy who killed him.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and even then it wasn't much. It was an incredibly awkward conversation. It's like, yeah, what is going on with him? Something is going on with him. And
yeah.
The thing is, I kind of went back, having plotted out the first like 5 issues or so, the new first 5 issues. I kind of went back and sort of, let me just check that I've got Banner right. And I had a look at the last time we saw him alive, which was like the during the Totally Awesome Hulk,
Mm-hmm.
And it's Greg Pak. And you go back and look at that issue where he is. He is not doing well
Mm-hmm.
in that issue. He really is not. And he's sort of, you can kind of see that he kind of comes out of the back of it, and it's like that issue ends on a sort of a bright note. And then the next thing you learn is that, yeah, he asked Hawkeye to shoot him in the head with an arrow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, evidently he wasn't dealing with it that well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and we're kind of coming out the other end of that. And it's like, again, you see Bruce Banner, but you don't really know how well, we get to see inside his head. We get to see his thought captions. I don't think that shows us how well he's doing.
Right.
It's kind of like Judge Dredd.
Mm-hmm.
In that respect, in that the thing with Judge Dredd, he very, very rarely gets, and I don't think I ever gave him this, he very rarely gets first-person captions. He gets like third-person captions, like omniscient narration. Either in present or past tense, but omniscient narration usually. And the wonderful thing about Judge Dredd is that the narrator will tell you like just enough that you can make a rough guess at what he might be feeling, but it's buried under like these layers and layers and layers of like he's sort of emotionless on the outside, and like to a certain extent even to the narrator, like the narrator has to sort of guess what you think, and we're sort of doing something like that, but with first person narration.
Yeah.
So it's like you're seeing Banner's thoughts, but you don't know. It's like, I would be worried.
I actually, one other thing I want to say about Banner that I really like is the fact that, deep down one of the rare commonalities between Banner and Hulk throughout the years, at least in my opinion, is that they really kind of both want to be alone, but they can't be because they're always connected. And it's like I like the fact that Banner is kind of, he's not really on the run so much as he's just trying to be by himself. And like one of the things about Banner is that he's truly kind of incognito just by being himself, because the thing he's most famous for is being a big green monster that destroys things. And it's like people kind of recognize him, like he was kind of recognized.
This is the thing. It's like if you saw George Clooney,
Sure.
would not have to do very much work at all to not look like George Clooney.
Right.
If you saw somebody who looked a bit like George Clooney in, like, you know, the Quickie Mart or whatever, in like your local, you know, in a bar or something, or like hitchhiking, you know, you wouldn't be like, oh my God, that's George Clooney.
Yeah, you might double take, but you might not know.
I think Bruce Banner is just, and also there's a certain like suspension of disbelief here, but I think Bruce Banner is just inherent. There's something about him that is inherently forgettable. He's got one of those faces that is very bland,
right?
And like to be recognizable, he's got to have this very severe haircut and like wear these glasses that are kind of very, you know, and it's almost like, and wear purple pants. He's got to wear these purple pants. And you know, did he? This might change. You know, I've written a plot that involves him. There's a piece of a plot in a future issue that involves a flashback to him like choosing all the purple pants.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of, you know, it's based in established continuity, the continuity of the pants.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, is one reason why he wears purple pants every day for like, so people who will remember who he is,
right,
and recognize him. So, you know, yeah, but yeah, no, we'll see what it looks like when Banner is sort of alone and by himself and sort of not living in a healthy way, but we at least see him taking some small enjoyment in things.
That'll be good to see. I do want to talk about the art in the book. Joe Bennett was always a great artist, but you know, I really feel like he's kind of upped his game since he got on Deathstroke and now this. What made Joe such a perfect fit for the book and the type of story this is?
I think what we were looking kind of in a number of directions. I wanted somebody who was like, I didn't want style over storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
To start with, but and Joe is good at, like, you know what you're looking at on the page, always. But the thing he does that I think is why he's on the book is that things have weight. Things you see him draw something and it has weight. It has, you know, how kind of his Hulk, it's very easy to like have the Hulk kind of almost be floating along the ground, like a big balloon. But you look at Joe's Hulk and it's got mass, it's got weight, it's got solidity. And also he's very good at, he's like a duck to water to the horror angle.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, his transformations. We haven't really had the opportunity to, and I feel bad about this because I think the first, like, yeah, I've just written like, I just wrote issue 7, and I don't think I've given Joe a Hulk transformation yet. But his transformations are, and you know, I won't tell you how I know. That'd be a spoiler. But his man to monster transformations are amazingly good. Just absolutely. I mean, issue 5 is when you'll see one, but like, absolutely wonderful.
I do like what you said about the weight that he brings to it, like, because like in the first issue, there's the the two straight double page spreads, but the first one where it has the Hulk saying Sandra Ann Brockhurst, it's like
The
you can see his
the full
feet.
body shot.
Yeah, it's so powerful, and it's like it's weird that when I was thinking about it, and I was like, I don't think you don't often see the Hulk contextualized around his environment like that, and it was really cool seeing him in such a way, in such like a powerful double page spread sort of way. It was
Well,
really amazing.
I mean, writing that, I think I wrote in the script something like because I knew it was going to be a double spread.
Hmm.
So obviously, a panel shorter than it is wide. Uh, and I think I wrote something in the script which was like, I want the whole of the Hulk in this. So he's sort of hunched over to fit. And that's kind of, he's in this stance where he's sort of looming, which is like exactly what I was after. But like, yeah, he's sort of to fit into the panel. And he, even then, I don't think he quite does. I think he's sort of very slightly like maybe in the back but it's like he almost doesn't quite fit in a double page spread.
I also like how Joe kind of like accentuates his monstrous nature. Like his eyebrows are
Oh
so,
yeah,
it's so good.
his brow
Yeah.
is like, there was a thing like Joe is a big fan of the thing that Kirby used to do, where like one eye is sort of wide and one eye is narrow, which is kind of like, and I think we're kind of trying to do that as a shorthand for when he's really losing it. But like, I know that I think we wanted to like go in that Kirby direction, and I think Joe jumped in with both feet. I mean, you'd have to ask him, but I'm pretty sure he jumped in with both feet there. He is absolutely. I mean, the best possible person we could have on this book.
I think it was really funny reading. I read an interview with him where he was talking about the book, and it was one with you in it too. But somebody asked him a question about like about his experience with the horror book. He's like, "Oh, you've done horror book before," and he was just immediately like, "Not like this." And you could tell that he was like really into it. And I thought that was, I don't know. I mean, obviously, it helps a lot if your collaborator is also really into the
fun.
idea.
Well, he started like requesting things, and it's like, hey, how about we do this? And I'm like, oh, that sounds disgusting. How about, and I'll be like, well, we could pencil this in for here. So that'll fit nicely in this plot. And it's like, so yeah, no, he's somebody who has an enjoyment of the horror. And we're gonna, there's kind of things that I want to sort of earmark him for. So we are going to have like guest issues.
Yeah.
We've got Lee Garbett coming on for 6. And that is a kind of, that's almost a breather issue after issue 5, but it does introduce some like some new players in the storyline.
Yeah, Lee would be a great fit for that too.
Yeah, no, well, Lee, I love working with Lee. Lee's great.
You guys worked on Loki together, right?
Yeah. He's absolutely fantastic. But I've basically given him a bunch of stuff to kind of design and throw together, and like some really weird stuff. So I think that's going to be one to look forward to. That's going to be a very creepy one. And then Joe's back for 7 and 8. We were thinking like up till about issue 11 or so. We're kind of thinking of doing like, I had this idea that we'd do like 2 on 1 off.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, I think I probably borrowed that from Bitch Planet, because I think they did that. 2 with the regular artists, 1 with the guest artists.
I was going to ask about like the with issue number 3, you know, like that was just announced as having, you know, like there's 4 different artists that are going to be joining.
Yeah, that was in the original pitch.
Right.
That was basically because, having been through the rodeo a few times and like having like the last issue being the one where like it's all down to the wire, the last issue, the first start being one where it's all down to the wire, I was like, okay, let's give Joe like not even a break, just like a head start.
Mm-hmm.
Midway through, we'll make issue 3 a guest artist issue, and I think that was when we came up with the. I think at some point that was when we came up with the idea of like 2 on 1 off. But I was thinking like, okay, issue 3 is the guest artist issue. That is the kind of thing that websites write about. Like,
It's so true.
issue 3, and already a guest artist. Oh, plus a change. You know exactly what the article would be. If it
Yeah.
was like, you know, even like Lee on 3, you know what the article would be. Even like somebody I like work with regularly, like Paco Medina, or like and even a great artist, it's gonna be that article. It's gonna be that like, issue 3, get started. So the only way around that is to lean in
Right.
and make it a happening. Make it like
Design it around that idea.
yeah. Issue 3 is the guest. Oh yeah, issue 3. Oh no, guest artist issue. Guest artists plural issue.
Mm-hmm.
With like the most amazing guest artists we could find, doing like a Rashomon story with like multiple perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that. That's a story, but it's a good story. So it's, and also it's like issue 1, you kind of wow people. Issue 2, there's a bit of a drop off. You're sort of like there's always a drop off for issue 2, always. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes a very severe one. And so I wanted issue 3. It'd be like like all those people who kind of picked up the Silver Surfer maybe a strip issue,
mm-hmm.
because that, oh my god, that's never been done. Got to have a physical copy of this. Again, I want people to like have an excuse to pick it up, to be like, oh well, I read issue 2 and I was like, but then I heard about issue 3.
Yeah.
You want to kind of keep people engaged, keep people kind of, and and it's that thing where you sort of, at least until you've sort of built a level of, to kind of ease the drop off, basically. Mm-hmm. So you've got so I had all of these kind of very mercenary reasons for doing it, very kind of practical, cold-hearted practical reasons, but also it's like, it's a really cool thing just to do, just from an artistic point of view, from a kind of, even though obviously I'm not one of the artists, but you know what I mean, from like a kind of creative point of view, it's a really exciting thing to do. And like, I was worried because I had no idea who any of the artists were, apart from Gary Brown. He was the only one I knew about. And like, Will just didn't tell me about any of the others until the art was done. So like, I get this PDF of like, here's the whole issue, can you letter it? And it's so beautiful.
Yeah,
it is incredibly beautiful. And I was just, thank goodness.
There's such good fits for the stories too.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful the way it all hangs together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just every single one of them. I mean, like, where do we even begin?
Leonardo Romero, come on! We were hyping up before we started talking.
Well, he is so wonderful.
What? So Leo's doing the cop story.
Yes, there is a. What it is there's a, and there's, this is semi a spoiler, but like the Marvel website has already put up a preview which kind of shows off the first pages of each of these little stories, which are kind of viewpoints of the same incident. And you have the framing sequence, which is Jackie McGee going after the story and like interviewing everyone, and then the conclusion she comes to. And then you get the 4 points of view, and it's a cop, a bartender, an old lady who is held hostage, kind of, and a priest, and it's a hostage situation in a church.
Mm-hmm.
And Leo does the cops story, which is very much a classic superhero tale, to the extent that we kind of lampshade it a little. We have. I had to kind of be very careful not to have them say things like "true believer," not to like over egg the pudding too much.
Just randomly throwing an Excelsior in there.
Yeah, exactly. Not over egg it, but it's like make it really clear that this is, this is like Marvel comics in the Marvel universe are like these sort of documentary things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, this is the audience. This is somebody who is like, follows, big fan of all the heroes, follows the big fan of the Avengers, big fan of, and he sees the Hulk as a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And Leo does such a good Hulk. And just everything he does is absolutely wonderful. I'm sort of I was talking earlier about how like there's a kind of that sort of I want to say Alex Toth influence.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's very sort of gauche to sort of compare artists to other artists. I know it's a little rude and it's sort of not done, but it's like I feel like when it's someone like Alex Toth, that it sort of verges back into a compliment. But it's like that sort of lineage of style. I love that style so much. I love Leo in particular, just his work. That Captain America story he did. That's just beautifully put together.
Mm-hmm.
Beautifully done. It's but for this, he's really like you can. And I mean, he's you were saying earlier he's like a young guy. I mean, this is what he's like now. I am so wanting to see, not to like give the guy a big head, but I kind of I want to see where he's at in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. What level he's on. I was talking about Jamie McKelvey earlier before we started recording, and he's a friend. I know him in my actual life,
Mm-hmm.
outside emails, and although he does live in London, so I don't see him very often, but I do see him physically. But like looking at issue 1 of The Wicked and the Divine, that was like absolutely gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of, because he did that thing recently where they kind of called back to a scene from issue 1 in like one of the very recent issues.
Right.
And I think because his art style had changed so much in like subtle ways, but so much, that he kind of redrew the scene, and it is a quantum leap.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so like, people like Jamie, they're so good that you don't think they can get better, and then they do. I was just going to say, I think Leonardo is one of those. I think in like 5 years we're going to be like looking at his style and going, "Oh my god, we thought he was good.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know."
You're talking about the scene with Jamie where he redrew the Last Pantheon's like kind of death sequence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a great scene.
Yeah. It is kind of amazing because you don't often get an opportunity to see like the same scene handled again, to see that actual direct comparison.
It's like a crossover with Kieran's Decompressed podcast. It's like from like a process point of view, it's such a kind of valuable thing.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine there are so many artists who just like pouring over those two issues.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's, and I mean, that's to move on to the other artist, Paul. I want to say Paul Hornschmer.
Yep.
That how it said he is absolutely wonderful. I almost feel like I tied him down too much with like wanting, because I wanted a very specific style for that. I was like basically saying, looking for a kind of, to me, Adrian Tamine, Dan Klaus. I'm sure my pronunciations are all over the shop today.
I think that's correct, actually.
Okay, but yeah, basically that kind of indie Fantagraphics in the 90s kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And having sort of taken a look at his art, I'd love to work with him again on something. I'd love to I'd love him to like get involved with Marvel again in some capacity. But that is like, I think that's when I think people reading the issue, that's when they're gonna get like, they're gonna start to have their socks kind of blown off a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really, really quick, I actually want to ask, like, I know previously you've worked with like Marvel style, but on this one you're scripting a lot more tightly, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically an evolution of when I first started working with Marvel, which is about 4 or 5 years ago now. But when I first started working for them, I like relished the opportunity to go full Marvel style. I was like, I've never worked Marvel style. I really want to. So I'd write these, like, every page was like this collection of paragraphs of like, this happens and then this happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then like over time, I started putting in like panels again and being like, oh, don't pay attention to these panels, just. And like now I just do this thing where I write like a full script.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just happened over time. It's, it kind of got to the stage where I think because it turned out that it was harder to work like Marvel style to that extent. And I was kind of doing that thing of like writing these like 6 paragraph pages and like expecting a 6 panel page back, and sort of, it's like, yeah, sort of, I do this thing now where I do like a full script and then I get the art back and I can sort of tinker with the dialogue a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And like change things around if I kind of come up with any, and occasionally if I come up with any like new ideas, I can sort of go in and or if I want to like foreshadow something that I've only just thought of for like down the line, I can kind of do that in small ways. I think it's much better to kind of, I think you should always do like a draft for the letterer like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like another draft for lettering.
Was it Ultimus Marvel style?
No, I think that was similar. I think that was one where it was pretty much each page had like a specific number of panels.
Okay.
And then I'd kind of... but the artist should always feel free to like... and I don't always say this, but like the artist should always feel free to like mess about.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had, when I was working on like New Avengers and US Avengers, with Paco, he'd like occasionally do things like he'd move stuff about, he'd like flip panels around, he'd do stuff, he'd sort of split panels up occasionally, but like when he felt it'd work better, and then it was very easy to just alter the dialogue, and the result would generally be better than what was in the original plot. So, and I mean Joe I think does the same. He's sort of at the layout stage.
Mm-hmm.
I said this in an interview recently, and I think I made it sound like, I think I said something like, and then the layouts happen, and sometimes we tinker with it, and it's good. And I mean, what I meant by that was like sometimes at the layout stage, Joe will tinker and kind of be like, "How about this?"
Mm-hmm.
Or like, and sometimes like editorial will be like, How about that? And but we do layouts. We have this thing where these very kind of rough layouts that sort of give us an idea, and then Joe goes away and turns it into a beautiful art.
I did want to ask about the two double page spreads in a row in the first issue, because
Yeah.
that's kind of atypical. Like, you don't really see that happen very often. That seems like something that was probably very specifically in your script, because you really wanted to whammy those moments.
Yes, that was. I came up with that because originally we were just going to have the one, and then I think this was like long before. I think this was while I was still pitching. No, it was after. It was after I knew that I was definitely doing it, and I'd done like a 20-page pitch for issue one, and then I meet Tom, and he's like, "We don't need, we're still looking for artists. We don't need the plot for issue one for ages yet, but you should know it's going to be 30. It's going to be 30 pages." And it's like, okay. And immediately I start thinking, well, we can spend all of that on tone. And it's like, I mean, I know people, I know there's this whole thing right now with comics have reached a certain price level.
Like a value.
And there is and there is a kind of, I still think of 30 pages as, I think of 20 pages as 20 cents a page.
Mm-hmm.
Have I got that right? Yeah, 20 cents a page. And for a $4 comic. A $4 comic is 20 cents a page. A $5 comic at 30 pages is somewhere between, I want to say it's around the 70 cents a page mark. And thinking of it in those terms makes me more likely in a 30-page comic to do something like 2 double-page spreads in a row. In a 20-page comic, I would be like, oh, the waste. But in a 30-page comic, I feel like I can risk it. And the rewards, the payoff, will be absolutely worth it. And, I mean, I got that from somewhere. It's like, it wasn't like, I mean, that's a Tom King thing.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 double-page spreads in a row. That's where we've seen that. And he does it on 20-page comics. I think I don't have that level of confidence. But for this, it's like, I feel like a lot of the art of writing comics is when you see something good, when you see a tool that works, do not be afraid to borrow it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so recently, and in the rules, you can sort of, if you look at my comics over the past 6 months, you can see I've been you can see what I've been experimenting with.
Mm-hmm.
And who I've been reading, and at what point the influence dissolves entirely and enters my bloodstream. And it's like, and then, it starts becoming less obvious. And it's like, sorry?
No, I was just going to say, I feel like you said the line about how, if you see something, don't be afraid to borrow it, basically. Tom is a perfect example of that. I mean, he's famous for using nine panel pages.
Yeah, he's reinvigorated 9-panel grid.
Yeah, exactly. And
I mean, if you look at Royals, a couple of 9-panel grids at the end of Royals,
mm-hmm.
In the special. Those were kind of, that was deliberately, and that was from the strip panel naked people.
Hassan Otsman El How.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That was him explaining the 9-panel grid, and me going, oh wow, now I'm really interested in 9-panel grids again. So I was reading Tom King comics and going this is great. But it was having it explained like that, going, oh, I want to play with this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's and now I've sort of played with it, and it's there's a couple of 9 pound grids in Rolls, a couple of 9 pound grids in Hulk 1. It's like they're doing that middle panel thing, both of them. And it's like, and now I'm sort of writing, it's sort of gone back into my system, and it's sort of in the toolbooks, but I'm not sort of, it's like that thing when you get like a shiny new electric screwdriver.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly you're like I have to build a shelf.
Yeah.
I've got to build a bookcase. I'm going to use this thing. Wow, it's brilliant. But yeah, no, the two double page spreads together thing, it was like, we had the moment where we were revealing the Hulk. That was in there. And it was like, and when Tom said you've got 30 pages, I was like, I can do that thing.
Yeah.
I can do that thing that I saw in that Batman comic that was so audacious.
Mm-hmm.
That was so audacious. And I can use it in this different way for like a close-up. And like an intensification. Because the one I remember is the one where like Riddler walks into a room and delivers the feed line, and then you flip the page and it's Joker delivering the punchline. Mm-hmm. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And that was like, oh, I can't ever do that now, because it'd be like, you know, it'd be like eating a Tide Pod for me. It'd be like, you know, I'd just be like, no, I'd be like, no, not eating a Tide Pod, walking a wire. It'd be like walking a wire across 2 buildings. I'd be like, no, I can't do that. I'm too afraid. But also it's like, well, he's done that. I've got to find a different way to use that tool, or I'm just, you know, I'd feel bad. But like with that, I was like, oh, that is the tool I need. Mm-hmm. You know, so it turns from this thing where you're like, with the 9 pound grids, you're just messing around. But it turns from this thing where you're like, oh, I want to do that, you know. But it turns from this thing to like, I've seen the perfect tool I need for this job. I've seen the perfect like spanner that would fit this bolt perfectly. And it's the 2 double page spreads in a row thing. And I mean, you know, I've done that thing. I've done the Steranko thing before, which is the other 2 double page spreads thing.
Wait, which one's that?
Which is, it's Steranko did it first in the 60s. You do this thing where you buy 2 copies of the comic and you line them up together and it makes a 4-page spread.
Right.
I've done that, I want to say twice. The only one I remember is the prologue to New Avengers, where there's this giant like thing. Oh Christ, what's it called? Montage. This giant montage of stuff that will happen, and like I think I managed to get it all in. Not entirely how it was, but you know, I managed to do it all.
I do think that the you brought up value, and like
yeah,
I think one of the interesting things about that is it's like, it's so easy to look at. I know some people who like judge comics value based off of how long it takes them to read, which is, it's a really fascinating thing, because it's, I don't know if length of time is really the best determinant. Like for me, like the thing that I like so much about the double page spread is like when you get done reading a comic, you want to feel like it impacted you, like it really, like it left a feeling with you, and like those 2 double page spreads were so good at like having a real impact that it's like, I mean, the read length didn't really matter there.
When I was younger and stupider, I made a big thing, like generally about density, panel density, and like story density. Because I'd come from the 2000 AD background, where like it's 5 pages an episode. You know, you kind of create and destroy your whole world in 5 pages. And I was like, you know, a very cocky little shit. And I think that's my one swear of the podcast. And you know, I was very cocky. I was very like, but you know, I didn't understand as much as I could have at the time about how stuff fit together, and like when to abandon density in favor of impact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think definitely palling around with Kieran, talking to Kieran, has taught me a lot about the mechanics of comics, like that, of the weights. Space is time and space is weight in comics. The more space you give something, the more importance you give it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think obviously the rules are very different when you've only got 5 pages a week to work with. And yeah, no, I think I feel like I'm still learning about how to use space, how to kind of, and there are still people coming along. And I mean, to take it back to Tom King for a moment, I think one of the reasons he's made the impact he has is because he's doing new stuff with the tools available. He's doing stuff that other people aren't really doing, and he's sort of approaching it with a level of, I want to say, audacity. If he's listening, he's probably going to like, you know, what are you saying? I don't know. I've only met the guy a couple of times, but there's a whole story involving Daredevil. But the he approaches things with a level of confidence, which I think is the word, judging by his Twitter feed, he would balk at. But yeah, he's got that level of confidence in his tools, and that is something that I think that's probably the thing in terms of influence. It's not so much the individual tools, but the confidence in using them.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of what I'd like to be influenced by.
One example that I think is a really interesting one. Like, you look through like the last decade of comics, and I would say one of the most powerful single issues you can possibly find. One of the things that people bring up as one of the best single issues, especially in superhero comics, is the Pizza Dog issue of Hawkeye. And like that's like
there we go.
It's almost a completely silent issue. It's like basically a dog's interpretation is all kinds of like iconography and everything like that, but it's like, I don't know, it's such a fascinating issue, but it does things completely different. And I think it also uses 9-panel grids a lot, if I remember correctly. But
yeah, the Hawkeye was, I mean, even issue 1 of Hawkeye, people were like pouring over that.
Oh, yeah.
Just like, I remember like almost dissecting that. And that's another example. And it's like, nobody remembers the frequency it came out.
Right.
Nobody.
Mm-mm.
It took as long as it took, and you know, it was as good as it was, and it was very good. But like, yeah, that first issue, you know, everybody was like on 10 clicks for the second. The Pizza Dog issue, the issue just after Clint is deafened again, the sign language issue.
Mm-hmm.
That whole sequence where every issue is kind of happening over a very short space of time, but from different perspectives. And it took me a couple of issues to like work that out, that like all of this was happening at the same time. But like, yeah, there is another example of like an inspirational comic, in that you see somebody, and it's not like, it'd be kind of the easiest thing and also the worst thing in the world to sort of say to an artist, "Oh, be David Aja."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you be David Aja for me? Just be David Aja.
Yeah, not a big ask.
It's like just do that. And it's like, no, that's not a lesson. It's not do this. It's do your thing with the confidence of this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so, I will borrow tools, I'll steal tools, but it's how you use the tools. Like, I don't think I'm going to do another 2 double page spreads in a row.
Right.
Because, like, it's a matter of space, and it's a matter of that tool has now been used.
Right.
And that it was the perfect tool for that one moment. But unless I have exactly the same moment, and what am I doing having exactly the same moment, you know?
It won't have the same impact if we used it again, too.
Yeah. So it's like there's got to be, at some point, I will need a moment to have that much impact.
Mm-hmm.
And I had better find a new tool, and whether I come up with it, and I've come up with a couple of things. I'm not entirely devoid of imagination or creativity, but it's like whether I come up with it or I steal it, it's like I'm going to need a new tool.
Yeah,
and I'm going to need to have the confidence to use it. To kind of build the moment that I need. And also, this is a very writer-centric way of putting it. I've almost completely, and partly I'm just realizing this now, just how bad this looks, but I've almost completely ignored the contribution of the artist to this. I'm like I'm talking as if I sort of come up with this stuff out of thin air. You can put 2 double page spreads in a row, but unless the artist can draw those 2 double page spreads in a row, unless it's, if it wasn't Joe, if it was like Joe Bloggs, some dude who was just sort of starting out and, or was, I don't know, just like,
if it was me,
yeah, let's use you.
Yeah.
Invent somebody. Just about, if it was that David Harper.
Yeah.
Then, without the artist, none of it works. None of it works.
Yeah.
It's like, you have no tools without the artist. And like very often it's, I talk about like, again, I talk about like using the 9-panel grid. On Royals, but it's like, oh, hang on. Pause for a second while I wrap my memory. Hang on.
Are you trying to think of the artist?
God. I am trying to think of the artist.
Javier Rodriguez?
Nope.
Oh,
this was on the special.
Oh.
Nearly got it. Yeah, this is... I'm a terrible human being.
I will have it in 2 seconds. Mike Del Mundo?
Yes. Oh, God. I was getting him confused with, a totally different person. Oh, dear. But yeah, no, Mike Del Mundo. And... So yeah, we had all these 9-panel grids and Royals, but it was Mike Del Mundo, his command of acting and expression. If that was just heads, it would have just been the flattest thing, the flattest, worst, most rubbish thing in the world. But because it was him, and because he was. Because people see his art, and it's the beautiful vistas, the beautiful landscapes, the kind of his command of light, but he's also got this command of expression, which is like if we're talking about beautiful colors, I'm going to have to mention Marguerite Sauvage, but there's his command of light, but also his command of expression, and without those expressions, without the acting. It would have been nothing. So you're using all these tools as a writer, but without the artist, what you need is the artist. Without the artist, you're done. You're doomed. There's nothing there.
Well, Al,
So
I gotta let you go. I've kept you for
yeah,
way
no,
too
I've got to.
long, but I could keep going on like this forever.
Before I go, we didn't finish talking about the four artist Hulk issue. We talked about two of the artists, and I briefly mentioned Marguerite Sauvage. I just want to say that her command of the page and the panel layout and the colors is superlative. And again, expression and the material. They're like leaning into the material.
I also love her rendition of the Hulk from the old woman's perspective. It's amazing.
Yeah, that was amazing to see. Just this kind of monstrous in such a different way,
A
and
romantic
like
way.
kind of yeah. It's like it is like what would like, and it wasn't even kind of because I was like yeah, I kind of want a romance comic, but the way she sort of delivered that, it's almost like a romance novel cover as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, and yeah, that is how that would be, and it's just yeah, her Hulk is just this
Heartthrob.
incredible, yeah, almost like a heartthrob Hulk, but like kind of weird and disgusting as well. It's like that straddles this line, perfectly.
Yeah.
And then yeah, I want to mention Gary Brown
Mm-hmm.
because he's like just. I mean, people have been using like Vertigo-esque
Mm-hmm.
um, about that, but it's just again the line, the shadow, the command of expression, the kind of the sort of closeness. It's really hard to explain, but it's like you're sort of you're right in it with his art. It pulls the reader right in there in a way that is very useful for a horror comic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Gary is a hell of a talent.
Yeah,
I've loved his stuff for a while. I mean,
he is amazing.
I think the
He
first
is
thing I
great.
came across is because he took over the Massive after like a
Oh
little bit.
yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, all of his stuff is just brilliant.
yeah. No, he is really good. But yeah, no, having implicated myself as one of those terrible writers who coast on their artists and then take all the credit.
Hey, we
No, I
did
do want to.
talk about Joe's his handling of the double page spread earlier, so you didn't totally do that.
It is
Um,
true. It is true. I mean, no, Joe is amazing. I'm really happy to be working with him at the moment.
mhm.
He's that's been one of the luckiest collaborations for me in a while. I think it's really good how well he's just the person for this book,
Mhm.
in so many ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just going to say it's been great being on. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Al Ewing. You can find him on Twitter at Al_Ewing, on Tumblr at alewing.tumblr.com, and his work in comics like his recent runs on The Ultimates and You Are Deadpool, and his current run on Immortal Hulk. If you're a fan of the show, check it out on Patreon. If you back it on there, you not only support the show, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher, and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find it on social media as well. Like it on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Nick Paletto, Mike DiArgenio, Dylan Campbell, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Michael Garland, Nick, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, David, Jason Massey, Mike Gillis, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Guarino, Dan Lee, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, I.R. James Udaskin, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Abraham Reisman, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Chipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Avino, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from the album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.